And today we are going to be talking about PTSD. And I have with me today Cynthia Dudley, who is the Executive Director of the Trillium Center, and Michelle Zahn, and who is also an employee here at the Trillium Center. And we're going to talk about Cynthia's story and what is PTSD, what are the symptoms, and the recovery. And we're kind of thinking of ourselves as sitting around the coffee table, so we hope you will join us, and we think you'll find this session very informative. Okay, Cynthia, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Well, my name is Cynthia Dudley, and as you mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of Trillium Drop-In Center. I'm one of the 3 founders of the center. We're a peer support center in Prince William County that helps people with mental illness, and everyone that works here is diagnosed with a mental illness, including myself, who has PTSD and a couple of other things.
And my name is Michelle Zahn, and I'm a senior facilitator here at Trillium, and I have bipolar disorder.
All right. Well, let's start off with maybe the basics. What is PTSD?
Post-traumatic stress disorder is PTSD, and people often get PTSD after a traumatic event in their lives. And you know, it could be anything from a car accident to a medical procedure, sometimes traumatic, or I know for me it was childhood trauma, which include emotional and sexual abuse. So it really varies, and there's a lot of returning vets who have PTSD as well, which is why I wanted to talk about it on the video.
And so that's what it is, and what are some of the, I mean, how did you find out or realize that you were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, for me, I knew something was going on when I was very young. I was about 12 when I realized something wasn't right internally, when I compared myself to other people. And I wasn't quite sure at that age what it was. And then, you know, I sort of tried to, you know, move through life to the best of my ability. But then in my 80s, in the 80s, not my 80s, I'm not that old yet. In the 80s, I was robbed at gunpoint at one of my jobs, and that scared the hell out of me, and triggered, that was a traumatic event, but it also triggered some previous trauma in my childhood. So I was kind of a wreck for several years.
And so once that happened, that robbery, you sought counseling?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't function. I was a mess. I couldn't be at work. I couldn't, you know, I went to a movie, and a character in the movie reminded me of the person that had robbed me, and so I left the movie theater in a panic.
And when you say you couldn't function, I mean, you talked a bit, what was the feelings? What were the feelings that you were having?
Well, it was total terror. It's, you know, constant fear, and knowing that I was going to somehow die, and just terrified, not able to act in the world.
And did you feel like you could talk to other people about this constant terror, or did they?
No, I think most people just wanted me to get over it. I think you know, my boss at the time, when I was robbed, he said, well, you're working in retail, what do you expect? It's going to happen. You know, people are going to get robbed. And for me, it was, you know, no, this is a really awful thing, and I need some help. And so I stood up for myself, and got some therapy, and you know, landed with a great therapist, a psychologist who did her work in PTSD with vets. So I got really lucky.
How wonderful is that?
Yeah, I found somebody that really knew what the heck they were doing.
And one of the things you had told me in another day was that this constant terror impacted your life on all levels.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
You were working in a bank.
Yeah.
And tell me about how you just didn't want to go outside.
Yeah. Well, you know, I worked at this bank downtown Ann Arbor, and I had trouble walking the 4 blocks from the employee parking up to the street, because I was just terrified all the time, and I couldn't walk 4 blocks out in the open, and I ended up parking all the time in front of the bank, and you have to feed the meter, right? And of course, you'd be working and you wouldn't feed the meter, and So I'd get tickets, and of course I wouldn't pay the tickets, and my car would get towed. And I think over a 5-year span of working at the bank, my car was probably towed 4 or 5 times. It was that awful for me. But I couldn't, there's so many things that I just couldn't do because I was just trapped. I was trapped inside my head. I couldn't break free.
And one of the things that I have heard, especially because a lot of people do think of PTSD as something that only impacts veterans.
Right.
And I had recently read a story that said veterans, when they're deployed, and they're going through awful wartime experiences, they do have their team with them.
Right.
And they can commiserate, they can talk it through. They
Right.
have some sort of peer support.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when veterans come home, that's when the PTSD becomes even more unbearable.
Because,
Yeah.
if I can say, it sounds like they are coming home to isolation and a sense of alienation that many of us with mental health issues
Yeah.
go through.
But I think it's not just the isolation being by themselves, but even when they're around, or myself too, when you're around someone who doesn't really understand it, it seems to make the symptoms worse almost sometimes if somebody doesn't get it, I think I mentioned to you before that I had read, it finally hit home for me in regards to PTSD. I read something that said PTSD is not the person refusing to let go of the past, it's the past holding on to the person, which is so true. It's like you can't break free. You cannot.
And you were able to, after a lot of help,
Yes.
to be able to look at this aspect of your life and remove it enough far away, but so that you knew it was still you, but it didn't have to consume you 100% of the
Yeah,
time.
it didn't have to control me. I had worked on, like I said, I was with a therapist who really understood PTSD, and she was an expert at working at trauma, and so what I had to do was sort of learn how to be in my own skin and think about the trauma and really work on it for years, not just a short bit, but for years I would have to work it over until it no longer controlled me internally. Now that's not to say that, I don't have evidence of PTSD and it still doesn't control my life in some ways, but, for the most part I'm in charge, I get to make the choices for me. And I still can't do some things, but I do a lot of things really well. So now I focus on what I can do instead of what I can't.
Tell us a little bit about the story, about how you realized that that perfection wasn't the ultimate goal.
Oh, yeah, so, okay. I also suffer from a dissociative disorder, which is depersonalization disorder. And I don't know, most people are familiar. You try to meditate, and a lot of people get into an out-of-body experience, right? For me, I was always out of my body, that's the way I describe it. So I couldn't stay present, I couldn't be, but I always had sort of this vision of myself perfect, and I knew that I was strong, I knew that I was determined, and I knew that I could do it. But I sort of, like, when I was going through therapy, I sort of had this, utopian version of myself where I knew I could reach it, but I wanted to reach it in order to be done or good enough, or
Was it like you set this bar and,
I did.
and you're supposed to get there?
yeah, and I knew I could. I absolutely 100% knew I could, and I still believe I could. But there came a point for me when I just got to good enough, and it was time to set my past behind me and lovingly say, okay, enough is enough, and I'm good enough, and now I focus on all the good in life and helping other people.
And how powerful is good enough?
I know.
It's a wonderful thing and a wonderful gift to give yourself,
Yeah.
to not to let go of perfectionism.
Yeah. Yeah, and know that you don't have to be trapped by it.